11, and this is the last module that you might get asked about in your exam, and it's called the external environment. Okay, now you should all be fully aware that the word external refers to outside the business. So the external factors are things that might have an impact on the business, that could be positive or negative, but that the business has absolutely no control over. Okay, now what you have to be aware is the different types of external influences that might affect a business. Now the first one is the competition, because the competition might do something that will impact on a business's sales and profit. So for instance, what they might do is that they might decide that they're going to reduce their price. If they reduce the price, your customers are going to switch brands to the cheaper business, and therefore you are going to lose out on sales and profits. They may have a big promotional campaign, which means again people are persuaded to shift from your business to the competition, or they might bring out a brand new updated product which yours can't compete with. Yours is seen as out of date, and therefore all your customers go to the competition as well. So competition will definitely have an impact on a business, and that business will have no impact on the factor itself. Right, the second external factor that will have an impact on businesses is the use of ICT. Okay, and businesses have been had impact completely on the use of ICT, because for instance, if you take many people that worked at ICT with ICT have now found that they've actually lost their jobs. So banking is a massive example of this, because obviously before cash machines were invented, we all had to go inside the bank and we had to go and speak to a lady and she gave us our money. Now we've got internet banking, we've got cash machines, and a lot of people that years ago were employed in banks have now lost their jobs because of machinery. Okay, now there has been a question in the exam before when you've been asked about the different ways in which businesses can use ICT. So they're looking at for things like, how can a business use databases? Now databases are great because they store information about the customers. Okay, so if you take Tesco for instance, they've got their loyalty card scheme. That's brilliant because they've got a database. I've got a loyalty card, and they've got all information on me, where I live, my age, number of people in my family. They have access to all the things I like to buy at the supermarket. So if I stop going to Tesco, in the post, ironically, I'll receive some vouchers, and it'll be very much tailored to what they know I like to purchase in an attempt to encourage me to come back to them. We can also use databases to mail merge. So a lot of the time I might receive junk mail in the post, and it's actually got my name and my address on it, and it's talking about things that are specific to what I like to buy. So we can use databases, businesses can, to mail merge offers as well and tailor them to the individual customers. Okay, now they'll also use spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are great with numbers, as you know from IT lessons. Okay, so they will put things like their profit and loss, their cash flow forecasts onto spreadsheets. This is good because obviously it can be done accurately, because the computer will be better at the calculations than we will, and also it can be done very quickly, so the business can see straight away where it's making profit, where it's not making profit, and what it needs to do to improve. Businesses will also use word processing, and that might be because they want to send out letters to customers. They might want to send letters to suppliers. They might want to record minutes of meetings that they've had and send out minutes that way. They also will do desktop publishing, and this tends to fall in line with, they'll use it for marketing. So they might produce promotional offers, sort of posters, things like that. They might do their logo on it, design their logo. They'll have websites. All right, so ICT has been very big with that. And finally, they will use it for communication purposes. Now I'm going to go to a new page here for communication, because this is actually quite a big area. All right, so with communication, all right, they will use text messages maybe. Now that's really big if you order something on the internet. So if I order a package and I'm waiting for it, then I might receive a text message telling me that it's now left the depot and it's going to arrive with me in the next couple of days. All right. You might even get emailed receipts. If you go to Cardiff now and you buy something from the Apple store, then they won't necessarily print you out a receipt. They'll ask you if you'd like it electronically, and if you give them your email address, your receipt for what you've purchased will actually be emailed to you. So less paper, and it's quite convenient, and it means you can always keep it, can't you, save somewhere, and therefore you won't lose your receipt if you ever need it. Okay, we've also got social media. That's a great tool for businesses in order to communicate with its customers, because they can advertise and they'll tailor it. When you go on your Facebook page, you'll find that many of the advertising there has been tailored to the type of person you are, your age, your gender, and the type of things that you like. So it's very good targeted now. Advertising. And finally, we've got video conferencing. Now the examiner will accept Skyping. All right, video conferencing is what businesses will do when they want to communicate with maybe other offices or other factories that they've got overseas. And it's just basically speaking into a microphone, and there will be a TV screen, and you'll be able to see the other person in another part of the world probably, and you can have a meeting with them. Obviously, the equipment in the first place is going to be quite expensive to purchase, but after that, it can save quite a lot of time and money, because you haven't got to fly to the other side of the world in order to have a meeting with somebody. You can do it in the business that you work in. Okay, now we've also had big developments with ICT in terms of production. So not just communication, but also in terms of production as well, because we've got things like CAD. That stands for computer aided design, and that's where you actually use a computer to help you edit and test your designs before you actually make them. All right, so rather than putting all the expense into actually making it and the time to make something to then decide it's not right and you need to change it, all of that is very time consuming. Now they'll design them probably in 3D using the computer, and they can come up with they can solve a lot of the problems without actually making it now. So it's easier and it's less expensive. And then you've also got computer aided manufacturing, known as CAM. And this is where the computer will actually control the production of the product, usually using robots, but it means that you don't need to have human beings making the product anymore. And again, that's very expensive for the business because they've got to buy the equipment in the first place. However, in the long term, it's cheaper because you don't have to employ all of the staff. Now, there are consequences of having ICT. Okay, it's not all good. The first one, as I've touched on, is cost, and primarily it's cost in the short run, because you need to have the most up-to-date equipment. This is expensive. If you're making a product that's based around technology like mobile phones, then your customers will want the latest version. They'll want the latest technology incorporated in it. So as a business, you're going to have to spend a lot on R&D. So it's costly. Secondly, obviously another consequence is that you could see a rise in unemployment. This is because the machines, the technology has replaced workers in many of the different industries. However, obviously what we do demand now is where there is a need for skilled ICT workers, because somebody has got to invent this machinery to do these tasks. Somebody's got to be able to put it right when it goes wrong, and actually be able to oversee the use of the machinery. But as far as unskilled work is concerned, most of that now is done by machines. And thirdly, there is a threat to security. That's another consequence of all of this use of ICT in business. We've got a threat to security that could come from fraud. All right, and obviously you could come from hackers who gain confidential information about your workers or about customers, and that's a big threat. And lots of businesses spend a lot of money each year making sure that they can minimize the size of that threat. Okay, next we're going to move on to environmental factors. So we've looked at the factors like the competition, we've looked at the change in use of ICT, and now I'm going to do environmental. with this great handwriting that I've got here. Okay, so there is a negative impact of environmental factors. For instance, we've got pollution. All right, as we start using more machines, etc., in our industry, we've got litter is an environmental consideration. We've got congestion, and all of these factors are the things you're going to write about if the examiner asks you to comment on the impact it might have on the community of a particular business moving in. Okay, and businesses become under pressure from different stakeholders like governments and consumers to behave in a responsible way. And there has been a question in the past where the examiner has asked you to consider how a business could be more environmentally aware, how they could behave in a more responsible way. And the most ways in which they've done is that they've reduced their packaging. Okay, they have reduced the amount of carrier bags that they give out, and obviously the government in Wales has had a big push on that because now they charge for the use of carrier bags in an attempt to get us using less new ones and actually recycling the ones we've got. There's an increase in recycling. Businesses are encouraged to recycle. Sometimes you can get grants for recycling. Okay, there's pressure for businesses to reduce their carbon footprint. So that could be food miles, for instance. So a lot of the time now you'll go to restaurants or even Marks and Spencer's food hall, and they'll be saying that they source most of their food locally, so it hasn't driven miles to get to you. And some businesses will have a car sharing scheme. So rather than having one person in their car and lots of them, now there'll be less cars on the road, but lots more people using them. So you share transport. Okay, so they're the different considerations we've got to take into consideration when it comes to the environment and how it can impact on a business. There is also, fourth one, the next one, is pressure to act ethically. Okay, now by ethically, we mean values, don't we? We mean your beliefs, what you think is morally right and wrong. And there is pressure on businesses to behave in what is an ethical and fair manner. So that's why we've got things like fair trade. You'll have businesses that say we only use fair trade products. All right, you might have some businesses that will pay the living wage. All right, now that goes above the minimum wage. The government have set the minimum wage at a certain amount, but some people will argue that that's not enough and that people should be paying the living wage. And some businesses will do that. They'll pay them more. They might advertise that they don't use sweatshops in their production. These are found in less developed countries, and they are usually they rely mostly on workers, unskilled workers, and they pay them very little money. Their working conditions are also really, really poor, and obviously the benefit to the business of using this sort of production is the fact that it reduces their employee costs, and it also therefore reduces their costs and gives them more profit. Okay, but it's not necessarily seen as an ethical way of conducting your business because these people are working in terrible conditions. Okay, now one of the questions that has been asked in the past is, what are the advantages and disadvantages of a business behaving ethically? Now the main advantage is that you'll have a better reputation because you are seen as a business that cares. You're seen, your brand name cares, and therefore you will have a higher reputation. People will trust your brand. That could increase your sales and profits. But having that, and especially if it's giving you a USP, a unique selling point, because the others don't behave ethically, the competition, then it will also allow you to use price skimming. It will allow you to increase your price. And therefore, another advantage is that you're going to get higher profits, because people are willing to pay the higher price because you are an ethical business. And people that thrive from that were things like the Body Shop, because they were one of the first businesses to advertise the fact that they didn't test on animals. And if you go into the Body Shop, their products are more expensive, but you'll also notice that people are prepared to pay a higher price because it has an ethical reputation. Now the disadvantages of this, fair trade products don't come, they're usually more expensive, aren't they? They don't come cheap. So therefore, being an ethical business usually means it's more expensive. Your costs are going to be higher, and obviously that can have an impact on your profit. The other thing is you've got to train your staff because you need to have them behaving ethically. Okay, so for instance, as our school, it is no good the bosses, the head teacher, the governor's saying that we are a really good school and we recycle and that we're ethically sound in recycling, if we haven't trained the pupils and the staff to actually recycle their waste. If they just go along and chuck it in the bin, then obviously we're not being very ethical. So one of the disadvantages is that you've got to take time to train your staff so they work with the values, the ethical values that you've got. Now, in the past, as a conclusion, where the question is said, should they be an ethical business or not? I've always argued, well, actually, it depends on, for the business, if it's important to the customers, because if the customers don't care, then you will still get your sales and profits anyway. Okay, so a lot of the time, whether or not you behave ethically will depend on your views as the owner. If you firmly believe in something, then the chances are you're going to want your business to behave in that manner. And secondly, if it gives you a USP and it's what your customers want, then it's definitely an important thing to do. Okay, so that is the pressure to behave ethically. Now we have other external factors as well. The next one is the government legislation. All right, so the next one is law. Government legislation. Okay, now the legislation will determine how a business should act. It's designed to protect us as customers and the general public, to make sure we're not exploited, in other words. Okay, and there's various different kinds of laws. You've got employment law, and I know Miss Hudson has touched on that in the human resources video clip that you can watch, that I hope you've all watched lots. All right, now in employment law, you have things like a contract of employment. That's law. You have to have a contract. You should have a contract which you and the employer has signed, and that will state how many holidays you can have, the hourly pay you're going to have. It will highlight and detail your terms and conditions of employment that you are expected to keep to. You also have to have regular pay slips, all right, which will tell you about all the deductions that have taken place. You, by law, are entitled to holidays, and you have to have, as the law states, the right amount of holidays you're entitled to. There is a maximum working week as to how many hours you should be doing. And again, all of this has been laid out by the government. It is law, it is statutory, so businesses have to do it, okay, to stop us from being exploited. We have to be paid redundancy pay if they no longer need us in their workplace, then we have to be paid redundancy, and that will be determined, the amount you get is determined by the amount of years you've worked. And the one you're very familiar with is you have to be paid the minimum wage. Okay, so all of that is various types of employment law that businesses have to stick to make sure that they don't exploit us as workers. Now, that's not the only law. They have got involved in others. There is environmental law, and that will determine legislation about pollution. Okay, so they will determine what the pollution levels should be. And if as a business you are polluting higher levels than you should be, then you will be fined. And also, to help us become more environmental, there will be government grants. All right, so the more we reduce our pollution or increase our recycling, then the chances are we'll get government grants. And as you know, government grants are good because it's money given to you by the government which you don't have to pay back. There's also health and safety law, which I'm going to do that. Okay, health and safety law, which makes sure that we as workers have a safe working environment. So I know I've said this to my class before, and that is, if you go and work on a building site, then they have to give you safety equipment, the steel toe cap boots probably. You certainly have to have the hard hat. Okay, and if they don't give you that so that you are safe and protected properly in the workplace, then they are breaking the law. Okay, right, the last law that you have to be aware of is consumer law. All right, now this is law that has been set up by the government to make sure that we don't get exploited as customers. So there's two in particular. You've got the Trade Descriptions Act, and you've also got the Sale of Goods Act. Okay, now these make sure that goods are described correctly, all right, because it would be very easy for a business to lie about what a product can do in order to tempt us to buy it, and then we buy it and then we think, well, it doesn't do what it says on the packet. So the Trade Descriptions Act actually protects us from that actually happening, and the Sale of Goods Act, and together they ensure that products are fit for purpose. You don't want to buy a pair of shoes that are supposed to be waterproof. You go out when it starts to rain and then your feet get wet. All right, they've got to be of a satisfactory quality. They can't fall apart after you've only used them a couple of times, and they've got to be as described. So those laws are there to protect us as consumers, to make sure we don't get exploited. Additional laws that you could become familiar with are the Weights and Measures Act. So therefore, if you go and you order a pint, then a pint is exactly the amount that you should receive. There's also competition law. Now, as you know, as more and more businesses maybe take over their competition, it allows them to increase the price, because as consumers we can't go anywhere else to buy that product. So therefore there is law in place that stops a firm from becoming too big and having a monopoly. By a monopoly, it would be the only business in the industry, really. It would have too much power, too much market share, because that would reduce the competition, which would allow the business to increase their prices really high and therefore exploit us in that way. Another law, which I'm sure you are very familiar with, would be copyright. Copyright law. Okay, and basically what this does is that it protects people who have created original work, and that might be in music, it might be in books, films, games, all right, all of these different things. What some businesses do is that they will set up a patent. They will apply for a patent, which makes it illegal for another business to then set up and copy their product. It's designed by the government, the patent, to allow them the opportunity to get the reward and the profit they deserve, having spent all of their money on research and development. So it stops the competition from copying their product straight away and therefore being able to sell it cheaper, because they haven't got all the research and development costs to cover. Okay, and another example of this is with copyright law is if you then want to use it, you actually have to ask permission. So as you know, we're putting on The Sound of Music in school, and we actually have to ask for permission to be able to actually put on that show. We're not allowed to just do it ourselves. Okay. Right, now then, the next thing I'm going to talk to you about is the macroeconomic environment. Now that sounds really difficult, I know, and very confusing, but it's not actually. It's just the economic factors that might affect a business which they have no control over. And the nice one that we've been doing in class, that we've seen a couple of times on the exam paper, is snow, isn't it? How will heavy snowfall affect a business? Okay, but there are more than just snow. The first one you have to be aware of is tax. Now there are three kinds of taxes that you need to know about. The first one is income tax. Income tax is paid by workers, all right, and it comes out of their wage. It is a statutory deduction. Statutory means you have to pay it by law, okay, and what that does is that reduces our disposable income, because we have less wages at the end because the government have taken more out as income tax. We've also got VAT, called value added tax, and that is a tax, a percentage tax that is put on goods and services. Okay, so in other words, it makes the prices that we pay more expensive. It's set at the moment in this country at 20%. So 20% of the price you pay for something goes to the government in the form of VAT. And finally, we've got corporation tax. Now, corporation is just another name for business, so it's business tax, corporation tax, and that is the tax that businesses have to pay on their net profit. Okay, so obviously if corporation tax goes up, they have to give a bigger percentage of their net profit to the government in the form of tax. That means they'll have less retained profit, which will mean they've got less profit to invest later on in their business, or less profit to give to their shareholders in the form of dividends. Okay, so that's tax taken care of. The second one is interest rates. Now this is the cost of borrowing money. All right, so obviously if the interest rate goes up, then the cost of borrowing money will go up. So it's going to make it more expensive for a business to borrow. All right, so their costs will go up, which will have a negative impact on their profit. Also, if interest rates go up for people like me, a consumer, let's say my mortgage goes up, all right, the interest rates I'm paying for borrowing that money on my house, then I'll have less money available at the end of the month to spend on goods and services. So my spending will go down, which could mean that sales for a business will go down. Okay, now don't forget interest rates will also kick in as far as saving as well, because yes, that's the cost of borrowing money is the interest rate, but it's also the reward that you can receive for saving money. So if interest rates are high, lots of people will stop spending and they'll start saving, because now they can make a lot of money saving. If interest rates are low, then there's not a lot of point saving your money in the bank, because the rate of return you get on it is not going to be very high. So that's interest rates. Next one is exchange rates. Okay, now my top tip, if you can't remember how exchange rates work and the examiner asks you what will the impact be on the business of a change in the exchange rate, then don't forget you can always write, if the business does not import or export, then there will be no impact on the business. Okay, and exchange rates is the cost of switching one currency for another, and the easiest way to do it, and I would still do this now if I was going into your exam, is to put a little example. So let's say, for instance, that at the current exchange rate, £1 gave you $6. Okay, and let's say the pound falls in value, it's worth less. So now the pound is only equal to $3. Okay, and let's pretend that there's a pair of shoes that I really like, and they're in America, and they are for $12. Now I have to pay the American business that's selling these shoes I like in dollars. They don't want pounds, because they've got to pay their workers in America, they've got to pay their bills in dollars, so they don't want pounds. So obviously I've got to switch my currency, and therefore originally, okay, these shoes were going to cost me £2. Okay, because I needed $12 to pay for them, and for every pound I gave up, I got $6. So therefore, they were going to cost me £2 in my money. Now the exchange rate, the pound has depreciated. It's gone down in value. It's now worth less. So basically, in order to get the $12 to pay for the shoes, I have now got to give up £4. Okay, now that's the example of me as a consumer, but imagine I was the business and I'm buying these shoes to put in my shop. All right, so before I only had to pay £2 to get my supplies, my materials, my products, my stock. Now, because the exchange rate has gone down in value, the pound has gone down in value, it's depreciated, the cost of getting my stock has now doubled. All right, so that's the impact on the business. All right, is that if I import my materials and the pound goes down in value against the currency, then obviously my costs have now gone up. Okay, so I'm going to have, and the impact is going to be less profit. Okay, the next one that you need to be aware of is inflation. And inflation, the definition of that is a general increase in prices across the country. Okay, so it's not in one particular product, but it's generally overall, all right, and measured from one year to the next. So if inflation is 2%, then it basically means that generally prices this year are 2% higher than they were last year. So therefore, it means that as a consumer, I can afford to buy less products, because unless my wages have gone up by the same amount, then I've got less money available to buy things now, because I've got the same amount of money available, but everything's gone up in price, so I can buy less. Okay, the next one that you need to know about is employment, and this is quite straightforward, really. Okay, if the economy is in a recession, then what you tend to find is that you'll have businesses closing. This means unemployment will go up. People will therefore have less money to spend, because there's more people that are unemployed. So if there's less money to spend, that means sales will fall, which means more businesses will be forced to close, More people will be made redundant, more people with less money to spend. And you will remember that that is called the multiplier effect. So just by one business closing down that might employ lots of people, it will in the end have a knock-on and a much bigger effect on the local community and the local economy. Okay, now the opposite to the recession would be an economic boom. And that is where there's lots of jobs. And there's lots of jobs because there's lots of people spending. All right, the economy is growing. So, for instance, demand is growing. Now, our economy could grow because we've got a product that lots of people want to buy in another country. So we make it here, which means we need more workers in order to produce the product, which we then sell abroad. So we've got that money coming into the country. The people that are employed in that business are getting wages, which they then go and spend. So the places where they're spending need to take on more workers. Those workers then spend money in the local community. And again, the multiplier effect kicks in. So you would need to be aware of that. And the last one that I mentioned before about the snow, the last external factor that could impact a business would be unforeseen events. And that's a hurricane, that's snow, swine flu, a natural disaster. All of these could impact on a business's sales and profits. And that is the end of the macroeconomic module. That's module 6, and that's the end. So hopefully you've watched them all and you've learnt it all and you know everything. Thank you.